So, I thought I'd talk about prison bars, because recently I was talking in a prison, went to meet some prisoners at Leicester Jail. I've been to a few prisons talking to people, but it was really interesting going and talking to these lads. Obviously, I was a doorman for 10 years, so I am these people. I recognise myself in all of those people, there but for the grace of God, as they say. And obviously I've got quite a lot of my friends still in prison, some serving life sentences from my previous incarnation. But what interested me about going to this particular prison was just the reminder that we had to go through several doors. So I've got two guards with me, and they open one door, we go through, they close the door, they lock the door, they open another door, we go through, they close the door, they lock the door, we open another door or a gate, they let us through, they lock the door, until we end up at the very centre of the prison, where the prisoners live. And what was interesting for me was, what I liked about it was the fact that these doors, to me anyway, kind of represented compound layers of emotion. And when you get to the very centre, so if you imagine you've got anger, as the outside emotion, and then you sit in that and you just let it fold back and go to the core of what the issue is. It might not be anything to do with, maybe I'm angry with somebody that said something about me, and I feel a rage, and that rage in my own mind, I think, oh, that rage is to do with the fact that somebody's upset me. But if I've got the skill to sit in that feeling and not identify with it and just let it recede back, which I did when I wrote my play Fragile. I had lots of rage and shame. Shame was the big thing that I was carrying around with me. But the outside door, or the outside wall, or the initial kind of compound emotion, was one of deep shame. But when I sat in the shame and I wrote about it and just kind of examined the feeling and went through the feeling of shame, that was the first door. Then I went through a feeling of rage, and that was another door. Then I went through a feeling of judgment, and that was another door. Then I went through a feeling of blame, and that was another door. But when I got to the very centre of it, when I got to the very kernel, the very centre of the emotion, I realised that my all of these external emotions were just like smoke screens. They were hiding me from what the real cause was. And the real cause, and this is what I did when I wrote Fragile, I went through every one of those emotions until I got to the very core of it. And the very core of it was that I felt, my fear was that I've been abandoned when I was abused as a boy. My fear was that I'd been abandoned by this person that abused me, abandoned by my parents. None of this is true, but this is how I felt. Abandoned by God, because I knelt down and asked God to take the pain away from me, and it felt as though he didn't. So I felt completely abandoned. I felt unlovable. And that's what I felt when I went to the prison. I thought, going through these lots and lots of doors to get to the very centre, and at the very centre you're talking to criminals who can no longer deny what they've done. That's the kind of the real kernel, or the real essence of the issue. You've got guys in there who are in prison for something, so they can no longer deny what they've done. They can no longer deny the issue, and that the issue is with them. So it reminded me of lots of different things that I wanted to talk about, but the main thing it reminded me of was the fact that the emotion that we feel, if someone triggers a pilot light and we feel anger, rage, shame, blame, disgust, judgment, that pilot light emotion is like the very, very surface of something that goes much deeper. So we say, I'm very angry at this person, and we look at this person and we try and solve the problem at the level of this person. But actually, if we were able to sit in that feeling and just let that feeling recede back, really sit in it and observe it and not identify with it, and just sit in there until it recedes back and say, what is this feeling? Where's this feeling come from? Who is it that's feeling this feeling? If we go right the way back to the centre, we'll find that it's probably indicating a leak or a negative script or a scar in us. A bit like if you immerse an inner tube into water and apply air pressure. That shows you, so we can find out where the leaks are. What most people do is that they try to deal with the leak at the level of the biggest bubble. So if the bubbles rise up from the leak, they're tiny little bubbles, and they rise up and they get bigger and bigger and bigger till on the surface of the water there's a big bubble. So most people in their life try to deal with their issues at the level of the biggest bubble. But the leak doesn't exist at the level of the biggest bubble. If you're perceptive and if you've got awakened consciousness, you recognise that that big bubble represents a leak somewhere much further down. So if we are perceptive and we trace those bubbles back, we will find the initiating leak. That's what I felt when I went into the prison. I thought, God, you've got to go through so many doors before I can talk to these people. That was the one thing that struck me, was that all of us have to go through compound layers of emotion before we can get to the core of something. So you meet lots of people who have existing problems with fear, or existing problems with anger, or existing problems with self-pity or blame, and wherever they go, they bump into it. So somebody that I meet lots of people who say, so and so let me down, this guy I was with or this girl I was with let me down. But people always seem to let me down. And when you talk to these people, you realise that wherever they go, somebody lets them down, and it's because it's not really people letting them down, it's a leak within them. So for me, when I was violent, I used to say everywhere I go there's violence. The world is very violent, but actually the world wasn't really violent, it was me. The violence and the discord was corresponding in me. I was the common denominator. So when I stopped looking out there and trying to solve things on the level of the biggest bubble, and started to trace it back to me, my violence came from massive insecurity. It came from a place of being very insecure, and that insecurity came from feeling abandoned and feeling unlovable. When I was able to trace it right back to that, I was able to seal that leak really, really easy. It was only really a little leak that happened kind of 30 years ago. So it was great. So that was the one thing I learned, is that if we have a surface emotion and it keeps rising in our life, and everywhere we go, somebody triggers our anger, somebody makes us angry, somebody makes us feel judgmental, if we keep blaming other people, or we find ourselves going into this same situation all the time, it's not to do with them, it's to do with us. So we look at it and we trace it back, and we'll find that the cause maybe it exists a couple of years ago, or 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, but it's in you. We can't change the world. The world won't be changed. The story of the world won't be changed. But we can change us. And if we can change us, the story of the world will change. We'll start looking at people differently. We'll start seeing the world differently when we change us. So all we need to do is change us. That's the first thing I learned. The second thing was, I was working with these guys, and they're just, they're somebody's son, somebody's brother, somebody's wife, husband, somebody's father, somebody's cousin. They were all somebody. They're all really nice people. I really liked them. They were like lots of people I've worked with. They're just people who had ended up in this particular place. But what I noticed when I was in this prison was that in a way they were lucky, because they could see the bars. They could see the locked doors. They could see the big warden following them around, making sure they don't get into trouble. They could see their prison. And interestingly as well, Leicester Prison is a castle. It's actually a castle. So these guys had created a castle. They'd manifested a castle with their actions. The castle was the consequence of their actions. But because their actions were necessary, because their actions were negative, the castle they created had bars and big walls and barbed wire and heavy set guards, keeping them in. So they built a castle, but they built a castle that they shared with several hundred other people, and that was they were locked into. And that was really interesting, because I thought, well, you know, I'm working with these guys today. Last week I was working with some nurses at the NHS who are also in a prison, but they can't see the bars, they can't see the walls, they can't see the guards. And then the next week I'm working with some people in Kensington, some business executives in London, and they're mostly very, very wealthy, and a lot of the business owners I work with are millionaires in this London place, but they were in their own prison, but they couldn't see the bars, they couldn't see the walls. So in a way, these guys were, and I don't mean this in a patronising way, they were kind of they're lucky, because they could see the bars, they could see the walls. There can be no denying that they were imprisoned. Whereas nearly everybody I meet, when I go and do talks and mentor people, when I do my classes, you're always working with people that are in one prison or another. The bars are made up from fear, they're made up from emotions, they're made up from negative beliefs, they're made up from perception, from cognition, they're made up from old scripts, they're made up from their conditioning, they're made up from their culture, from their religion, but they are bars nonetheless. I've worked with people whose bars have been so strong that they've committed suicide, or they've committed serious crime, rather than challenge these cultural mores, these cultural beliefs, this cultural conditioning. So the key is, I guess, you know, whenever I write an article or I write a book or I go and talk to people, my job, I think, as a teacher, well, my job, I'm certain, as a teacher, is just really to show them where the bars are, to show them where the walls are, to show them where the guards are, to show them where the barbed wire is within their own life, and then help them to recognise that they are the creator of those bars and those walls and those guards. They are the creator of that barbed wire. They are the creator of that prison. Maybe somebody else has put the conditioning in, but they've allowed it to exist and they've maintained it. Somebody maybe gives us the conditioning, but we maintain that conditioning every day because we don't challenge it. So I found that really exciting, that these people could see the bars. They could see. But interestingly, there was even help within this prison, because they brought me in to talk to these lads. And they've got books in there, they've got a library in there, and they've got access to computers, they've got access to information, they've got access to, you know, to knowledge, they've got access to potential. But of course, the moment you realise that you created the walls and you created the bars and you created the guards, the moment you realise that fully, and you realise that it's a fiction, I know that sounds arrogant, I know it does, forgive me, I don't mean it to sound arrogant, but it is a fiction. We've created that from our cognition, from our perception, we've created that. But the exciting thing is that means we can break down the component parts and recreate it into something better. You know, use kind hands and create a castle without bars and without guards, or without barbed wire. We can do that. And again, like I said, you know, that's one prison, but I know other people who earn $500 million, or they're worth $500 million, and they've got 3 mistresses and a cocaine addiction. And when I go and talk to people like that, they're in prison. They're emotionally mangled, they're emotionally, you know, they've got moats and bars and everything around them. They cannot escape from this negative perception. The money they've got is often becomes a prison. The responsibility that they've got to maintain that wealth becomes a terrible prison. The addictions they've created because of the misuse of the wealth has become a massive prison. You know, you imagine somebody that's worth, you know, several $100 million. That's a tremendous prison to be able to break out of. And again, you know, if I'm working with wherever I'm working, people from every walk of life, they're in prisons. Up until the age of 32, I was in a cultural prison. I worked in factories, I worked in nightclubs, I did menial jobs, I earned a menial wage, I was a menial thinker, I thought small. I had dreams of doing big things, but but never really followed it, because every time I got to the periphery of that reality and tried to break into a new reality, I felt these tremendous bars of fear place themselves in front of me, and guards would come around me. Sometimes internal guards, sometimes external guards, but internal, external, it's all the same really. It all comes from the same place, it all comes from the same clay. So breaking out of my working class roots, you know, this belief that there is an us and a them, and that certain things are possible and certain things are not possible, you know, those limiting core beliefs, breaking out of that took everything I've got. Everything I've got. I had to go to war with my own cognition, had to go to war with my own perception. I had to go to war with all of these beliefs. These beliefs were sentient. These beliefs were like independent identities and personalities within me that didn't want to be challenged, didn't want to get away from, you know, the factory. Maybe that part of me didn't like the factory, but it was comfortable. It's what I knew. Maybe it was boring, and maybe I hated every minute of it, but it was what I knew. And every time I went to the edge of that periphery and tried to educate myself out of it, I was bombarded. You know, these bars just formed around me, and it was a tremendously difficult thing to break away from. So I had to educate myself out of that. I had to go to war with the cognition, or what the Hindus call the sea of nescience. I had to cross the sea of nescience, the battle of Guru, etc. I had to cross that battlefield of ignorance, and I had to go through it by expanding my second self, by expanding my core beliefs. So I look at people when I go and do talks, and I think, well, you've created a reality here. It's not the reality you consciously want, but you've created a reality. You've created a castle. You've created, 3 meals a day. You've created a library. You've created a bed. You've created, companions. You've created lots of things there, and unconsciously you're thinking, I don't want to be here, I want to be at home. But at some level we've got to recognise that we've created that. Same as I created nightclubs and pubs, same as I created being able to go and sit in BAFTA or the Groucho, or the house I'm in now. What I'm doing now, I've created this. When I do my walks or my sovereignty course at Kumabi, I've created that whole thing from perception, from cognition. To create that, I've had to break down the old beliefs and use that energy, that energy that I've broken down, and I've had to reconstruct it into a new reality. So I've had to dissolve the old reality and use that as the building blocks for the new reality. So the new reality comes from the chaos and the energy of the old reality. We have to destroy a new reality. We have to destroy an old reality to create a new reality. That's where the energy comes from. This infinite. The energy is infinite because we're continually creating, maintaining and dissolving realities. I've lost count of the amount of realities I've created, maintained, dissolved. In my early days, I did most of that by mistake. I was creating, maintaining and dissolving by accident. And then later I learned to do that with esoteric knowledge by design, by changing cognition, by changing perception, by challenging old beliefs, by expanding old beliefs, by getting new knowledge, by applying new knowledge, and by using kind hands. Not using hands that are going to hurt people, but using kind hands to create a kind universe, a kind reality. And that challenge continues. Obviously we are in a reality, a problem-solving reality. That's how we grow, by engaging problems. Problems are a sign of life. So that's one of the big revelations I've had recently, is that wherever we are, it's a reality we've created. What we tend to do is create realities or create monsters. Then we forget we've created them, or we think they've been created by accident, or by conspiracy, or somebody's done something to create this reality. But at some level we must know that we've created the reality ourselves. And they think, okay, if I don't like the reality I see, I can change the reality I see just by seeing it differently, by again going inside. Consciousness is expanded and changed from the inside, from the film. So I was really excited about the fact that I'm talking to guys that have built a castle with their imagination. And I'm excited by the fact that I'm working with people who have created huge industry with their imagination, and I'm excited by the fact that I'm seeing people creating violent realities with their thinking, benevolent realities with their thinking, beautiful realities with their thinking, hellish realities with their thinking. So if we realise that we're the reality maker and that it all comes from our consciousness, that we are consciousness, and then we can start to create the reality we want to create. But we can't be naive about it. We have to look at, I was talking to a guy before, ages ago, who said to me, my wife doesn't believe that we can create any reality we want to create. I tell her, but she doesn't believe it. And I said, she doesn't believe it because you're 7 stone overweight. And she's thinking, if you can create any reality you want, why are you 7 stone overweight? He understood it, and in some areas of his life he was creating great things, but he wasn't able to transform his own vehicle, his own conduit. So how do we test this stuff? How do we practice this stuff? We practice it by changing the vehicle we're in. If we can change our reality, and we can create any reality we want through the cultivation of imagination and perception, then we've got to prove that to ourselves by, first of all, changing the vehicle we're in, changing the body that we're in. Otherwise it's just information. You've got somebody saying it but not actually living it. You've got somebody saying it but not actually doing it. Somebody that understands it intellectually but is not able to apply it. Once we understand it, we can create any shape we want with this esoteric knowledge. And we start with our body. So if our body's out of shape, it's very difficult to talk to the kids we're teaching, or talk to the people we're teaching, or talk to the people in our lives about the infinite power of and potentiality of our creative self, if we can't even prove that with our own body, with our own health. So one of the first things I did was think, okay, I'm going to prove this is right for myself and as a teacher, so that I'll use my perception and my imagination to get my body in the shape I want to get it into, which I did. I got my body into the shape I wanted to get it into. So that's the first thing. And then I start saying, okay, what else can I create? What do I want to create? What does my intuition draw me towards? Then I start to create those things, books and films and articles and experiences and but you've got to be the proof of it yourself. You've got to be the proof of it. And if you look in the mirror, just look in the mirror, that will give you an idea of whether you're making it work straight away. We can't ignore the fact that, if we can't control what we eat and drink, if we can't control our impressions, if we can't resist temptation, and if we can't, discipline ourselves to change to change our socks once a day, or to change our pants once a day, if we can't live in the world as men, if we can't actually exist in the world as a human being, it's no good as fantasizing about supernatural abilities, because we can't even control normal abilities. Although I think all abilities are supernatural, they're all incredible. Even a mobile phone, even 50 years ago or 100 years ago would have been seen as an absolute divine miracle. So, but the key is, if we want to start expanding and developing siddhas and being able to create outside of the ordinary, we first have to master the ordinary. So we have to be able to master the things, those dark places that we don't want to look at. If we're still losing our temper and getting into road rage, there's no power there. There's no mastery there. You can have any title you want. There's no mastery there. If we can't stop ourselves from going on to social networking and trashing people and being negative and trolling, if we can't control that, if we can't even identify that and control it, if we're still rationalising that, then no way we're going to get more power. We would be absolutely fucking and unequivocally too dangerous to handle any kind of power if we can't control those basic impulses. So before we can start really accessing huge amounts of power to be able to serve better in the world, we need to be kind. We need to be tremendously careful with this essential knowledge, this essence that we bring through. If we're not careful with it, if we've got leaks, we're going to be damaging more people than we're helping. And of course, you can't damage somebody else without damaging yourself. You can't be hateful to somebody else without first processing hate within your own body, within every cell of your body. You can't be judgmental to somebody else without first processing judgment in your own body and in every cell of your body. You can't make somebody afraid without processing that fear within your own body. Every single cell of your body will be laced and filled with it. You can't be violent to other people without first processing the violent impulses and the violent chemicals within your own body. When they say what we do to other people is what we do to ourselves, it's a no-brainer. It's absolutely true, because we have to process the poison before we deliver it. So we think we're damaging other people, but we are actually damaging ourselves. It's caustic, all of it's caustic. On the other hand, if we're able to control ourselves and align ourselves, which is really what the sovereignty course I do is all about. It's all about alignment to essence. If we're able to align ourselves and deliver love to people, deliver kindness to people, deliver service to people, be generous to people, and deliver happiness or deliver compliments. If we're able to work from a level of love, from a level of selfless service, of course, same thing applies. We have to process that love and that kindness in our own bodies before we deliver it. So every cell of our body will be filled with bliss if we're creating bliss for other people. So it makes no sense to harm other people. It makes no sense to be aggressive to other people or violent to other people or unkind to other people, because in doing it, we're doing it to ourselves. You've got the normal reciprocal response, of course. When you throw that out, it'll return. But the immediate reciprocal response is immediate. If I hate you, I have to produce hate within my body. And that's a chemical release of hormones, specifically adrenaline and cortisol, which has a tremendously caustic effect on the internal soft muscles, the organs, the heart, the lung, the intestines, the bladder, the arteries, the brain cells are all massively damaged by cortisol when it's not behaviourally released. So when we're producing all of these chemicals and delivering vitriol or delivering anger or sitting in anger or judgment or rage or whatever we're doing, not only is it unintelligent, it's dangerous to ourselves. This is what I learned, I'm talking from personal experience, I used to feel powerful when I was angry. I was the weakest man in the room. I couldn't even control my own emotions. So the incentive to be working at a higher level, to be working with higher energies, is to first of all master the lower energies. If we haven't mastered the lower bodies and we get this influx of extra energy, everyone that touches it's going to be damaged by it. It's no good if we're kind now and then 5 minutes later we're aggressive, or we're kind today but tomorrow somebody upsets us and we're road raging them and then blaming them. If we are going to be the tabernacle of essence, we need to make sure that we have control of the conduit, that we have mastery over the conduit, and that the internal conduit is gold lined. In other words, it's lined with virtue. So we have that self-control. And it's difficult because life challenges you, life tests you. But testing is good, because testing is about, the word test means to separate the impure from the pure. So when we're tested, it's like testing metal. We separate the impure from the pure. It can be very uncomfortable, but so this whole idea that we create our reality, I have no doubt about it at all. I have no doubt, but making it work and being consistent with that is the most challenging thing. That's the most difficult thing. And of course, we start with the self. We don't change our reality at the level of the screen. We change it at the level of the film, at the level of cognition, at the level of perception, and that's us. So it's just interesting to have a look around you. Have a look at the people you live with. Have a look at the job you're in. Have a look at the car you drive. Have a look at the house you live in. Have a look at how you feel in yourself. You'll get indications of what you're creating all around you already. You know, my life is, I'm surrounded by love, I'm surrounded by beautiful people and beautiful opportunities. Obviously, the same as everybody else, I have my challenges. I wouldn't want it any other way. But you can tell how your consciousness is developing just by looking in the mirror and just by sitting on your own in the dark and asking yourself, who am I? Who are you when you're alone in the dark? I spoke to a friend recently who'd disgraced himself, let himself down, and I said to him, who are you when you sit at home in the dark? Because I know who I am. I know exactly who I am. And that's not a judgment on him, it's just saying, you know, we've got to know who we are. And sometimes we only find out who we are by finding out who we're not. And if you want to find out who you're not, again, just look at your immediate environment, look at who you're surrounded by, look at who your influences are, look at your Facebook history, look at your Twitter history, look at how you treat people on a daily basis, look at how you treat the people starting with yourself. How do you treat yourself? How do you talk to yourself? What about your wife and your children? How do you talk to them? What about your workmates? What about the girl that cleans in the office? What about the managing director? How do you treat people? So if we can start with ourselves, if we can change ourselves, we can't change the world. The world is a fiction. We can change ourselves. We are the fiction makers, we're the storytellers. When we change ourselves, the fiction will change. You'll create a better fiction, you'll create a better reality. But you've got to start with yourself. Start by looking in the mirror.